The crystalline halls of the Zithran Palace gleamed with an otherworldly radiance, their surfaces carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and pulse with their own inner light. Commander Alaric stood in chains before the towering throne, his uniform torn and bloodied from the battle that had led to his capture. The vast chamber stretched upward into shadows, its walls adorned with trophies from countless conquests across the galaxy. Queen Thalira sat upon her throne of living metal, her alabaster skin marked with the distinctive neural patterns that glowed faintly beneath the surface, a sign of her royal bloodline. Her eyes, like twin pools of liquid mercury, regarded the human prisoner with barely concealed disgust. Standing at nearly 7 feet tall, with her elongated limbs and graceful bearing, she embodied the ethereal majesty of her species. Yet there was nothing soft about her demeanor as she studied the defiant human before her. "So," she said, her voice carrying the melodic yet sharp tones of the Zithran language, which the prisoner's neural translator converted to his understanding, "the infamous Commander Alaric, the human who dared to breach our sacred space." Alaric lifted his head, meeting her gaze without flinching, despite the pain from his wounds. His dark hair was matted with sweat and blood, but his brown eyes burned with unwavering determination. "I was on a rescue mission," he stated, his voice hoarse but firm. "My people were being held prisoners on the border worlds. I had no intention of invading your territory." A cold laugh escaped the Queen's lips. "Rescue mission? How noble, how human." She rose from her throne, her diaphanous robes flowing around her like liquid starlight. "You lesser beings always justify your actions with such grand words. Truth, however, is much simpler. You invaded our space. You destroyed our vessels. You killed our soldiers. Your soldiers were attacking defenseless colonies." Alaric shot back, his chains rattling as he stepped forward, despite the guards' warning gestures. "Women and children were dying while your forces stood by and watched." The Queen's expression hardened, her patterns flaring brighter with anger. "Silence. Your very existence is an affront to the cosmic order. Humanity is a plague that spreads wherever it touches, corrupting and destroying everything beautiful in this universe." She gestured with one elegant hand, and the massive doors at the far end of the chamber began to groan open. The sound that emerged made even the hardened soldiers flanking the throne step back nervously. Heavy footsteps echoed through the hall, each one sending small tremors through the crystalline floor. "Perhaps," the Queen continued, her voice taking on a sadistic edge, "Cathor can persuade you to show proper respect." The creature that emerged from the shadows was a nightmare-given form. Cathor stood nearly 10 feet tall, its body a fusion of organic tissue and biometal technology that was the pinnacle of Zithran engineering. Its hide was armor-plated obsidian that gleamed with an inner fire, and its 6 powerful limbs ended in claws that could rend through the strongest alloys. The head was distinctly reptilian, with massive jaws filled with rows of crystalline teeth that hummed with energy. Along its spine ran a series of neural interfaces that pulsed with the same patterns that decorated its royal masters. But it was the eyes that truly marked Cathor as something beyond mere beast or machine. They held an intelligence that was both alien and profound, ancient beyond measure, yet touched with a wild fury that had been honed over centuries of service to the royal house. The Queen smiled as the beast approached its massive form, moving with surprising grace. "Cathor has served my family for 300 years. No enemy has ever survived an encounter with the royal guardian. It responds only to commands given by those of royal blood, bound by neural pathways that cannot be severed or rewritten." Alaric watched the approaching creature with grim acceptance. He had heard stories of the royal guardian, whispered tales that became legends among those who fought against the Zithran expansion. Few details were ever accurate, but the core truth remained the same. It was death incarnate, and none had lived to describe it in detail. Cathor stopped a few feet from the prisoner, its massive head lowering as it studied the human with obvious hunger. Its breath came in deep rumbles that vibrated through the floor, and strings of some bioluminescent substance dripped from its jaws. Queen Thalira stepped closer, her posture radiating satisfaction. You see, Commander, there is no diplomacy here, no negotiation. Only the natural order being restored. Cathor, tear this insolent creature. Stop. The word came from Alaric's lips with such authority that even the queen faltered. What happened next defied everything the Zitherans believed about their most sacred creation. Cathor froze instantly, its massive head snapping up to focus entirely on the human prisoner. The beast's eyes narrowed, studying Alaric with an intensity that made the royal guards step back nervously. For several heartbeats, the chamber was absolutely silent, except for the soft humming of the technological components in the palace walls. Then, incredibly impossibly, Cathor lowered itself into what could only be described as a bow. The queen's face went ashen, her neural patterns flickering wildly as shock overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. This is not possible, she whispered, taking an unconscious step backward. Cathor, obey your queen. Attack the prisoner. The guardian beast didn't move. It remained in its bowed position, its eyes never leaving Alaric's face. The human prisoner was equally stunned, his own eye wide with disbelief at what had just occurred. I don't understand, Alaric murmured, his voice barely audible. What's happening here? Queen Thalira's shock quickly transformed into rage. Her patterns blazed with fury as she raised her voice. Guards, seize the human! Something is wrong with Cathor's neural programming. Take him to the containment chambers immediately. The Zitharan soldiers moved forward, but as they reached for Alaric, Cathor rose to its full height with a roar that shook the very foundations of the palace. The beast turned toward the approaching guards, and the message was clear: they would not touch the human. The standoff lasted for several tense minutes, with the queen's commands growing increasingly frantic as Cathor continued to ignore her completely. Finally, she gestured sharply to her guards. Withdraw all of you out now. As the chamber emptied, leaving only the queen, her prisoner, and the guardian beast, Thalira sank back onto her throne. Her elegant composure had cracked, revealing something almost vulnerable beneath. In 3 centuries, she said quietly, Cathor has never disobeyed a royal command. Not once. The neural bonds were forged by the greatest bioengineers our civilization has ever produced. They cannot be broken by any known method. Alaric tested his bonds, finding that Cathor's intervention had somehow weakened them. The metal restraints that should have been unbreakable were now cracked and bent. Maybe the bonds weren't as unbreakable as you thought, he suggested carefully. No. The queen's voice carried absolute certainty. There must be an explanation, some factor we're not considering. She studied him intently, her mercury eyes searching for something. Who are you really, Commander Alaric? What are you not telling me? Before Alaric could answer, the chamber doors burst open again. Lord Vexor swept in his robes, billowing dramatically around his tall angular frame. Unlike the queen, his patterns were darker, more severe, marking him as one of the older noble houses. His presence immediately made the atmosphere even more tense. My queen, he said, his voice carrying barely concealed ambition. Word of this incident is already spreading through the palace. The soldiers are confused, the nobles are asking questions. Perhaps it would be best if I took charge of the prisoner. My interrogation methods are more thorough. Thalira's expression hardened. Cathor's behavior is unprecedented, Lord Vexor. Until we understand what has occurred, the prisoner remains under my direct supervision. With respect, Your Majesty. Vexor continued his tone, suggesting anything but respect. Your emotional involvement with this human may be clouding your judgment. The Royal Council believes. The Royal Council believes what I tell them to believe, the Queen interrupted sharply. And I remind you that I am the one who wears the crown, not you. Vexor's patterns darkened further, but he bowed stiffly. Of course, Your Majesty. However, there are certain concerns about security. This human's apparent influence over Cathor could be seen as a threat to the stability of the throne itself. As if responding to the implied threat, Cathor emitted a low growl that reverberated through the chamber. The beast had positioned itself between Alaric and Lord Vexor, its stance aggressive and protective. The queen noticed this immediately. "Cathor, stand down," she commanded. But the guardian beast remained unmoved. "Cathor?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I command you to step aside." The beast's only response was to lower its head slightly, keeping its eyes fixed on Vexor as it remained in its protective position. Lord Vexor's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. "How fascinating," he murmured. "It seems our legendary guardian has chosen new loyalties. This could be problematic for the stability of the realm." "Are you threatening my throne, Lord Vexor?" the queen asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Merely observing, your majesty. But when the royal guardian no longer responds to royal commands, one must question who truly holds power in this realm." The tension in the chamber had reached a breaking point when Alaric finally spoke. "Enough." His voice cut through the political maneuvering like a blade. "I don't know why Cathor is responding to me, but I'm not interested in your court politics. I came here for one reason: to retrieve my people. That mission hasn't changed." The queen turned to him, her fury evident. "Your people are dead, Commander. The border worlds were cleansed of human contamination weeks ago. Your rescue mission was doomed from the start." The words hit Alaric like a physical blow. For a moment, his composure cracked, revealing the depth of his anguish. The weights of command, the responsibility for his team, the families who had trusted him to bring their loved ones home, all of it pressed down on him at once. Cathor sensed his distress immediately. The beast moved closer, pressing its massive form against the chains that still held Alaric. With a sound like rending metal, the restraints simply disintegrated at Cathor's touch. Both the queen and Lord Vexor stepped back instinctively, but Alaric made no move to escape. Instead, he placed a hand on Cathor's armored hide, feeling the warmth of the biometal beneath his palm. "I felt them die," he said quietly, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. "Through the neural link all military commanders share with their units. I felt each of them fade away one by one. But I had to try. I had to hope that some had survived." The queen's expression softened slightly at his words, though she tried to hide it. "You humans are foolish in your sentimentality. Attachment leads to weakness." "Maybe," Alaric agreed, "but it also gives us strength. The strength to keep fighting even when the odds are impossible." Lord Vexor had been watching this exchange with growing interest. "How touching," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But the fact remains that we have a security breach of the highest order. If word spreads that a human can control Cathor—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. All three of them understood the implications. The Royal Guardian was more than just a weapon. It was a symbol of Zithran supremacy. If that symbol could be controlled by one of their greatest enemies, it would shake the very foundations of their civilization. Over the following days, Alaric found himself in an unprecedented situation. Technically still a prisoner, he was given quarters in the palace and allowed a degree of freedom, largely because Cathor refused to leave his side and no one was brave enough to challenge the guardian beast directly. The queen visited him regularly initially to study the phenomenon of Cathor's altered behavior, but increasingly, for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. Their conversations gradually shifted from interrogation to something resembling actual dialogue. "Tell me about your home world," she said during one such visit, settling gracefully onto one of the crystalline chairs that had been brought to his chambers. Alaric looked up from the energy patterns of the window, where Cathor lay curled in what seemed an impossible position for such a massive creature. "Earth? It's nothing like this place, smaller, simpler. Our cities are built from metal and glass, not living crystal. We have oceans of actual water, not liquid light." "It sounds primitive," the queen observed, though without her usual disdain. "Perhaps," Alaric agreed. "But it's home." Every sunset is different, painted in shades your language doesn't have words for. The air smells of rain and growing things. Children play in gardens that haven't been genetically optimized for maximum efficiency. The Lyra studied him curiously. You speak of it with such longing, yet you were willing to leave it to fight and die among the stars. Because staying safe at home while others suffered was never an option. Alaric moved to sit across from her, noting how Cathor's eyes tracked the movement. That's what I don't understand about your people. You have such incredible power, such amazing technology. You could help the galaxy flourish. Instead, you use it all for conquest and control. The Queen's patterns flared slightly. We maintain order. Without our guidance, the lesser species would devolve into chaos and barbarism. Whose order your order? And whose definition of barbarism? Their debate was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Vexor, flanked by several high-ranking nobles. The moment Cathor saw them, the beast rose with a threatening growl. Your Majesty, Vexor said, ignoring the Guardian's obvious hostility. The Royal Council demands an explanation. This situation with the human and Cathor has gone on far too long. Questions are being raised about your fitness to rule. Queen Thalira rose slowly, her full authority evident in every movement. Are you suggesting I am unfit to wear the crown, Lord of Ectogor? I am suggesting that your attachment to this human and your inability to control Cathor suggest compromised judgment. The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Alaric tensed, recognizing the signs of a political coup in motion. This was about more than just his presence in the palace. This was about power, pure and simple. I see, the Queen said softly. And what does the Council propose? That we examine the human thoroughly, determine how he has corrupted Cathor's programming, then dispose of both the human and the compromised Guardian. Cathor's roar shook the entire chamber. The beast lunged forward, and only Alaric's shouted command of stop prevented it from tearing Lord Vexor apart. The noble's face had gone pale, but he held his ground. You see, the beast no longer serves the crown. It is corrupted beyond repair. And if I refuse your suggestion, the Queen asked, then the Council will be forced to vote on your removal from the throne. For the good of the Empire, of course. The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the room understood that this was the moment of crisis. The Queen's next words would determine not just the fate of Alaric and Cathor, but the future of the entire Zitharan Empire. Very well, she said finally. We shall have our examination, but it will be conducted according to my specifications in my presence with my safeguards. Vexor's smile was triumphant. Of course, Your Majesty. I shall make the arrangements immediately. As the nobles filed out, Alaric approached the Queen. You don't have to protect me, he said quietly. I knew the risks when I came here. She turned to him, and for a moment he saw past the royal mask to something almost vulnerable beneath. You don't understand, Commander. Cathor has been the symbol of royal power for centuries. If Vexor can prove that symbol has been compromised, he can oust you from the throne, Alaric finished. But why would destroying Cathor help his cause? Because he has another guardian. One bred in secret, one that responds only to his bloodline. The Queen's expression grew grim. He's been planning this for decades. You've just given him the perfect excuse. That night, as Alaric lay on the biometal sleeping surface that had been provided, he found sleep elusive. Cathor had positioned itself at the chamber's entrance, a living barrier between him and the rest of the palace. The beast's presence had become oddly comforting, a constant in a world gone mad. He was startled from his half-doze by a soft sound at the window. Looking up, he saw a figure in the shadows beyond the energy barrier. The Queen stepped through the barrier as if it were mere air, a privilege of her genetic codes. We need to talk, she said quietly, glancing at Cathor. The guardian beast acknowledged her with a slight tilt of its head, but didn't move from its position. About the examination? Alaric sat up suddenly alert. About what happens after? She moved to the window, gazing out at the twisted spires of the capital city. Vexor's plan goes beyond simply removing me from power. He intends to restart the expansion wars to push deeper into human space. Your Earth will burn within a decade. Alaric felt a chill run down his spine. Why are you telling me this? Because... She turned to face him. Her patterns dim in the low light. I've spent the last few days researching something. The genetic markers that allow royal bloodlines to command Cathor. They are not unique to Zitherans. The implication hit him like a thunderbolt. You're saying I share genetic markers with your royal family. That's impossible. Not impossible. Improbable, perhaps. But there are records. Ancient texts that speak of a great diaspora long before the rise of our empire. Some of our ancestors traveled far beyond what we now consider Zitheran space. You're suggesting that humans and Zitherans share a common origin. Not all humans, but some bloodlines, possibly including yours. She moved closer, studying his face intently. It would explain Cathor's response to you. The neural pathways recognize something in your genetic code. Alaric shook his head, trying to process the implications. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the current situation. Vexor still wants us both dead. Yes, but it gives us an advantage he doesn't expect. The Queen's eyes gleamed with something between hope and desperation. Cathor's bond with you isn't a corruption or malfunction. It's a restoration of something that was lost long ago. The next morning brought the promised examination. The Queen's private laboratories were a marvel of biotechnological engineering, filled with equipment that seemed more grown than built. Dr. Celine, the court's chief bioengineer, supervised the proceedings with obvious reluctance. These readings are unprecedented, she admitted after several hours of testing both Alaric and Cathor. The human's genetic structure contains markers I've seen only in the oldest royal bloodlines, and Cathor's neural responses to him are not aberrant. They're following a deeper programming than we knew existed. Lord Vexor's expression grew increasingly dark as the results became clear. Clearly, the human has used some form of bioweapon to alter both himself and Cathor. Destroy them both and end the charade. The evidence suggests otherwise, Dr. Celine replied carefully. These genetic markers cannot be artificially induced. They are inherited traits passed down through countless generations. Then you're all fools, Vexor snarled. No matter the explanation, the result remains the same. The royal guardian no longer serves the Queen. That is treason, and the penalty is death. He gestured to the soldiers he had brought, but as they moved forward, Cathor placed itself between them and Alaric. The beast's stance was calm but unmistakably threatening. Withdraw, the Queen commanded. I think not, Vexor replied. Guards detain the Queen. She is obviously compromised. The betrayal was now complete. As Vexor's soldiers moved to surround Thalira, she grabbed Alaric's arm. We need to reach the central core, she said urgently. There are records there, proof of what we've discovered. They ran through the winding corridors of the palace, Cathor clearing the way with a series of roars that scattered the guards. Behind them, alarms began to sound as word of Vexor's coup spread through the complex. The central core was a vast chamber at the heart of the palace, filled with crystalline structures that held the collected knowledge of the Zitheran civilization. As they entered, Cathor sealed the entrance behind them with some mechanism Alaric didn't understand. Here, the Queen said. Leading him to one of the larger crystals, she placed her hand on its surface and it began to glow with inner fire. The Codex Originalis, the oldest records our people possess. Images filled the air above the crystal holographic displays, showing star maps' migration patterns and genetic trees that branched and spread across the galaxy. See there, she pointed to one particular branch, the Zinari, a group that left our homeworld over 1 million years ago. They traveled through the galactic rim, establishing colonies on dozens of worlds before disappearing into the unknown sectors. Alaric studied the images, beginning to understand. And you think Earth was one of those colonies? not just any colony. The images show genetic sampling preservation protocols. Some of our ancestors intermingled with the local populations they encountered. Your bloodline carries those markers. The sound of energy weapons firing outside interrupted their discovery. Vexer had brought heavier force to bear on the sealed entrance. The barriers won't hold much longer, the Queen said grimly. If Vexer gains control of this information, he'll use it to justify a complete purge of human worlds. The shared heritage would be seen as contamination to be eradicated. Then we destroy it, Alaric said firmly. No. She grabbed his arm. This knowledge could be the key to peace between our peoples. If we can prove the connections show that humans and Zitherans are more alike than different. And if Vexer gets his hands on it, he'll twist it into justification for genocide. Cathor suddenly roared, and they turned to see the entrance beginning to buckle under sustained fire. Energy barriers that should have lasted days were failing in minutes. There is another way, the Queen said suddenly. The neural crown. If you wore it with your genetic markers and your bond with Cathor, you could claim legitimacy to rule. Alaric stared at her in shock. You want me to usurp your throne? I want you to save both our peoples. She moved to a crystal pedestal where an intricate crown of biometal and living crystal rested. The crown doesn't require full Zithran blood, just the genetic markers, and with Cathor's support. This is insane, I'm human. Your people will never accept me. Perhaps, but right now, it's the only option that doesn't end with all of us dead. The entrance finally gave way, and Vexer's soldiers poured into the chamber. Behind them came the usurper himself, flanked by guards bearing the banner of his house. Enough of this madness, Vexer declared. Seize them both. But as his soldiers advanced, Cathor stood and let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the chamber. The beast's patterns blazed with brilliant light, and every crystal in the core began to resonate in harmony. Impossible. Vexer breathed, his confidence faltering. The core responds only to true royalty. The Queen seized the moment. She grabbed the neural crown and held it out to Alaric. Choose commander. Let our peoples die in hatred, or choose the harder path of building peace. Without thinking, without analyzing the consequences, Alaric took the crown. The moment it touched his hands, it began to mold itself to fit its biometal components, flowing like liquid to conform to his skull. As he placed it on his head, the world exploded into new sensations. He could feel every living thing in the palace, sense the patterns of life that flowed through the crystalline structures, and through it all, he felt Cathor's presence no longer alien, but intimately familiar. No. Vexer raised his weapon, aiming at Alaric's head. I will not allow this abomination. But before he could fire, Dr. Celine stepped between them. You will not commit regicide in this sacred place, she declared, her own royal markers glowing softly. Other figures emerged from the shadows, nobles who had been watching the confrontation, scientists and engineers who worked in the core. One by one, they stepped forward, placing themselves between Vexer and the newly crowned, what was Alaric now, King Caruler. Vexer looked around at the assembled crowd, realizing that his coup was crumbling before his eyes. This changes nothing, he snarled. A human wearing our crown is still a human. The people will never accept this. The people will accept what keeps them alive, Dr. Celine replied. And right now, cooperation with humanity may be our only option for survival. As if summoned by her words, alarms began blaring throughout the palace, emergency signals that indicated an external threat. A communications officer rushed into the chamber. My lady. He addressed the Queen, then hesitated, looking uncertain whether Alaric was also now his superior. My lords and ladies, he continued diplomatically, there are reports of massive energy signatures on the galactic rim. Something is coming through the void gates. The Queen paled. The void gates haven't been opened in 1,000 years. What force could possibly... Her words were cut off by a tremor that ran through the entire palace. Not seismic, but something deeper, a disturbance in the very fabric of space-time around their world. Alaric found that the crown was feeding him information directly translating the sensor data into concepts his mind could grasp. "Whatever's coming," he said grimly. "It's bigger than anything your forces have ever encountered." Through the palace's vast windows, they could see lights in the sky, not stars, but something moving between them. Ships of impossible size were emerging from the quantum foam of the void gates, their forms defying conventional understanding of matter and energy. "The Devourers," someone whispered, and the name sent a chill through the assembled crowd. Alaric turned to the queen. "Who are the Devourers?" "Legends. Stories told to frighten children." But her face showed that she no longer believed they were merely stories. An ancient enemy that was supposedly defeated eons ago. They consume life itself, leaving empty space where worlds once flourished. And now they're here. Vexer said, his political ambitions suddenly seeming petty in the face of this existential threat. The barriers between their realm and ours have been breached. Cathor moved to stand beside Alaric, and through their bond, he sensed something that chilled him to the bone. The guardian beast recognized these enemies. Its genetic memory held impressions of battles fought in the far past, of worlds dying as their life essence was drained away. "We need to prepare the fleet," the queen said, but her voice lacked conviction. Our forces will be slaughtered." Alaric interrupted the crown's data streams, confirming his worst fears. "Look at the sensor readings. Those aren't ships. They're mobile habitats the size of small moons. Our most powerful weapons would barely scratch their outer hulls." Dr. Celine was studying readings from her portable scanner. "There's something else," she announced grimly. "The energy signatures. They're specifically tuned to disrupt Zitharan biotechnology. Our ships, our weapons, even our life support systems will fail when they get close enough." The implications were staggering. The Zitharan Empire, for all its pride in biological supremacy, faced an enemy that had been specifically designed to counter their greatest strengths. "Then what do we do?" one of the nobles asked, desperation creeping into his voice. Alaric felt the weight of the crown, both literal and metaphorical. Somewhere in the depths of its bioneural networks, he sensed the echoes of ancient knowledge strategies and technologies that had been lost for millennia. "We adapt," he said finally. "Your biotechnology may be vulnerable, but human technology isn't. Our approaches are different enough that they might not have prepared for them." Vexer laughed bitterly. "Human technology. Your primitive fusion drives and projectile weapons against forces that conquered the galaxy once before." "Not primitive," Alaric corrected. "Different. Sometimes the old ways are the most effective." Through the neural crown, he could sense Cathor's agreement. The guardian beast had somehow access to records that went back further than any Zitharan chronicle. There had been others who fought the Devourers species that combined biological and technological approaches in ways the current galaxy had forgotten. "We need to combine our strengths," the queen said, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. Human adaptability and technology merged with Zitharan bioengineering. "An alliance," Alaric agreed, "not conquest or submission, but true partnership." Vexer started to protest, but another tremor stronger than the first silenced him. Through the viewport, they could see one of the outer moons simply disappearing. Not destroyed, consumed its matter and energy absorbed into the advancing Devourer vessels. "How long do we have?" someone asked. Dr. Celine checked her instruments again. "At their current rate of approach, perhaps 6 hours before they reach the primary defense grid, 12 before they reach the planet itself." "Then we work fast," Alaric decided. "Lord Vexer, you wanted to preserve the Empire. This is your chance. I need you to coordinate with your contacts in the fleet. Get me every ship you can, every weapon platform, every defensive installation." "Why would I help you?" Vexer demanded. "Because the alternative is extinction." The crown's influence was making Alaric more decisive, more authoritative. "The Devourers don't distinguish between loyal subjects and rebels. They consume all life equally. The truth of his words was undeniable. Faced with annihilation, political ambitions seemed trivial. Very well, Vexer said reluctantly. But this alliance ends the moment the threat is defeated. If we survive that long, the Queen murmured, as the various nobles and officials rushed to coordinate the defense of their world, Alaric found himself alone with the Queen and Cathor. The guardian beast had remained close throughout the crisis, its presence a strange comfort in the chaos. "Do you really think we can win?" she asked quietly. "I think we're going to try," he replied, "and that has to be enough." Outside the palace, the capital city was in motion. Ships lifted from landing platforms with urgency, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing as they joined the growing fleet. The sight was both beautiful and heartbreaking, a civilization mobilizing for what might be its final battle. Through the neural crown, Alaric found himself linked not just to Cathor, but to the entire planetary defense network. Information flowed through him like a river: status reports, tactical analyses, resource inventories. And through it all, one truth became increasingly clear. In conventional terms, they stood no chance. The Devourer's forces outnumbered them 1,000 to 1. Their weapons could drain the life from entire star systems. Their ships regenerated damage as fast as it was inflicted, powered by the consumed essence of millions of worlds. But the Crown was showing him something else: fragments of ancient knowledge strategies that had been used in the distant past. The Devourers had been fought before, and while they had never been fully defeated, they had been delayed, driven back, contained. "There is a way," he said suddenly, causing the Queen to turn from her own contemplations of the approaching doom. "What?" "The Crown. It's showing me things. Ancient battles, forgotten tactics." He paused, trying to organize the flood of information. The Devourers consume life, but they can be overwhelmed by it, flooded with more energy than they can process. Understanding dawned in her eyes. "A life bomb. We've theorized about such weapons, but never built them. The cost would be enormous," Alaric agreed. "Every living thing on this world, channeled through the bio-neural networks, released in a single burst. It would kill us all. Maybe, or maybe if timed correctly, it would only weaken us. Leave us drained but alive while the Devourers choked on more life force than they've ever encountered." Cathor rumbled. And through their bond, Alaric sensed the beast's mixture of approval and resignation. The Guardian had participated in such desperate measures before in battles so ancient that they had passed into myth. The Queen was silent for a long moment, weighing the options. Outside, reports continued to come in of the approaching fleet. The outer defenses had been overrun without slowing the enemy advance. "How do we coordinate such a release?" she asked finally. The bio-neural networks were never designed for planet-wide simultaneous discharge. "They weren't," Alaric agreed. "But the Crown can do it. It's connected to every living network on the planet. With Cathor as an amplifier and your royal patterns providing authentication, it's possible." "And you?" she asked. "What happens to the human wearing our crown?" He smiled grimly. "I guess we find out if shared genetics are enough to survive what's coming." The next few hours passed in a blur of preparation. Emergency broadcasts went out across the planet, informing the population of the desperate plan. Remarkably, there was little panic. Faced with certain death if they did nothing, the people of Zitharan showed a courage that transcended species differences. Humans, those few who remained in the Empire as prisoners or slaves, were released and brought to the capital. Their different bio-neural patterns might provide crucial diversity in the energy pattern being prepared. Vexer coordinated the fleet's positioning, arranging the ships in patterns that would maximize the life force release, while providing some protection for the planet below. Dr. Celine worked with human engineers who had been brought up from the prisons, their different perspectives proving valuable in fine-tuning the bio-neural resonance frequencies. And through it all, Alaric felt the weight of the Crown growing heavier. The neural connections were deepening, anchoring him more firmly to every living thing on the planet. He could sense the fear and hope of billions, the determination of those preparing to sacrifice everything for a chance at survival. "It's time," the Queen said, as the first of the massive Devourer vessels entered the outer system. Even from this distance, their effect on space itself was visible distortions in the fabric of reality around them. Alaric and the Queen took their positions in the central core with Cathor between them. The guardian beast had grown, somehow its form expanding as it prepared to channel unimaginable energies. All across the planet, people stood ready, not just Zitherans, but humans and members of other species who had found themselves here through various twists of fate. "On my mark," Alaric said, his hands resting on the crown's controls. Through the neural link, he could feel every heartbeat, every breath, every flash of consciousness on the world below. The Devourer's fleet was swinging around the primary star, now their massive forms blotting out entire constellations. As they approached, the space around them began to darken as they drained energy from the very vacuum. "Now," he whispered. Every living being on the planet exhaled at once. Not just air, but everything that made them alive: neural energy, bioelectric patterns, the spark of consciousness itself. The energy flowed up through the crystal networks, through the bio-neural conduits, converging on the central core where Cathor stood ready. The guardian beast glowed like a star being born, its body becoming a channel for forces that no single creature should have been able to contain. Through the link, Alaric felt its pain, its determination, its absolute commitment to this final gambit. The energy built reaching levels that should have destroyed every circuit, melted every crystal. But Cathor held the beast's ancient genetics, allowing it to channel powers that modern technology couldn't even measure. And then, with a sound like reality tearing, the accumulated life force of an entire world was released in a single directed pulse. The effect was immediate. The Devourer vessels, which had been advancing in perfect formation, suddenly convulsed as the wave of pure life energy hit them. These beings that lived by consuming the essence of others were suddenly faced with more life than they could process, like predators forced to swallow an entire ocean at once. Ships that had seemed invincible began to writhe and twist. Their perfect formations dissolved as the Devourers lost control of their vessels. Several of the smaller craft simply imploded, unable to contain the flood of energy. But the cost was staggering. On the planet below, billions of beings collapsed as their life force was drained away. In the central core, Cathor's roar of pain echoed through every crystal, every corridor. The guardian beast was burning from within its body, struggling to process energies it was never meant to handle. Alaric felt himself failing the crown's demands on his neural system, pushing him beyond all biological limits. But still he held on, directing the energy, shaping it into a weapon that could wound gods. The Queen was beside him, her patterns flickering as her own life force was drawn into the attack. Yet she stood firm, adding her will to his, her royal authority to the neural patterns being broadcast. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The energy pulse ended, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to press against the eardrums. Across the planet, people began to stir, gaspings as they drew breath that tasted of copper and lightning. In the core, Cathor swayed on its feet, the beast's massive form somehow diminished. Yet through the neural link, Alaric could sense its satisfaction. They had done something unprecedented. They had hurt the Devourers. But had it been enough? The answer came from the displays around them. The Devourer fleet was in disarray, their perfect formation shattered. Several ships had been destroyed outright, while others drifted powerlessly through space. The survivors were withdrawing, falling back toward the void gates. Yet even in victory, the cost was clear. The planet's population had been reduced by nearly a third, those who had given too much life force to survive the feedback. The bioneural networks were damaged beyond repair in many areas. And in the central core, Cathor was dying. The guardian beast lay on the crystal floor, its massive form slowly dissolving as the energies it had channeled consumed it from within. Alaric knelt beside it, his hand resting on the creature's head. "You saved us all," he whispered, feeling Cathor's consciousness beginning to fade. Through the neural link, the beast's final thoughts reached him. Images of ancient battles, of cycles of destruction and renewal stretching back millions of years. And underneath it all, something like gratitude that in its final moments, it had managed to protect not just the Zitharan Empire, but all life in this part of the galaxy. Cathor's eyes closed for the final time, and its body crumbled into crystalline dust that scattered in the recycled air of the chamber. Alaric stood slowly, the crown feeling lighter now that the Guardian's amplification was gone. The Queen moved beside him, her patterns dim but determined. "The Devourers are withdrawing," she reported, "but they're not gone. They'll return when they've recovered from the attack." "Then we need to be ready for them?" Alaric replied. "All of us. Human and Zitharan together." She nodded slowly. "The Alliance. It needs to be real this time, not just a temporary cooperation, but a true joining of our peoples." Through the crown, Alaric could sense the thoughts and feelings of the survivors across the planet. There was grief, yes, and exhaustion. But there was also something new hope. The impossible had been achieved. Ancient enemies had stood together against a greater threat and emerged victorious. "It won't be easy," the Queen warned. "There will be those who oppose any collaboration with humans. And there will be humans who refuse to trust Zitharan?" Alaric agreed. "But we've proven it's possible. Today we fought as one people." Lord Vexor approached them, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching humility. "The fleet reports that the Devourers have fully withdrawn beyond the outer perimeter. The immediate threat appears to be over." "For now," Alaric corrected, "but they'll be back. We need to prepare." Together the Queen added, her gaze fixed on Vexor. "I trust this recent unpleasantness has reminded you of what truly matters." Vexor bowed stiffly. "The survival of our civilization takes precedence over all other concerns, Your Majesty. I pledge my support to this alliance." It was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but a beginning nonetheless. In the days that followed, representatives from both civilizations worked to establish the framework for their cooperation. Human technical knowledge was combined with Zitharan biological mastery. Trade agreements were negotiated, cultural exchanges, planned defensive pacts formalized. Alaric found himself serving as a bridge between the two species, his unique status as a human king of the Zitharans, allowing him to translate concepts and concerns from one civilization to the other. The neural crown, rather than making him more Zitharan, seemed to enhance his humanity, giving him the tools to remain fundamentally human while understanding the alien perspectives around him. The Queen Thalira worked alongside him with a dedication that surprised many of her subjects. The proud, aloof ruler, who had once despised humanity, was now one of its strongest advocates. She often spoke of Cathor's sacrifice, how the guardian beast had chosen to protect all life, not just Zitharan life. "We are not so different," she said during one of their planning sessions. "Your people and mine. We both love, we both grieve, we both hope for a future for our children. The Devourers would take all of that away." Dr. Celine had been placed in charge of the joint research initiatives, working with human scientists to develop new technologies that combined the best of both civilizations. Early results were promising hybrid biotechnologies that could adapt to either human or Zitharan physiology weapon systems that fused human engineering with Zitharan living materials. But perhaps the most important development was the gradual healing of the planet itself. The bio-neural networks, damaged by the massive energy release, were being rebuilt with help from human computer specialists. The new networks were more flexible, more resilient, and designed to accommodate multiple species, rather than just Zitharans. 3 months after the attack, a joint ceremony was held to honor those who had died in the battle against the Devourers. A memorial was erected in the central core where Cathor's dust still sparkled in the filtered light. The memorial bore inscriptions in multiple languages, but its most prominent feature was a statement that came to symbolize the new alliance. Here fell Cathor Guardian. Of all life, in its sacrifice, we learned that protection knows no species and courage honors no single bloodline. Alaric stood before the memorial, with the Lyra watching as representatives from dozens of worlds placed flowers, crystals, and other remembrances. Human children played alongside young Zitherans, their laughter echoing through the vast chamber where, just months before, the fate of civilizations had been decided. "Do you think we can really do this?" the Lyra asked quietly. "Build a lasting peace between our peoples?" Alaric considered the question carefully. Around them, former enemies worked side by side, sharing knowledge and resources that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. The neural crown allowed him to sense the emotions of those nearby, and what he felt gave him hope. Not the desperate cooperation of desperate times, but genuine curiosity and growing trust. "I think," he said finally, "that Cathor died believing it was possible, and I'd like to honor that belief." She smiled, the expression transformed by its rarity and sincerity. "Then we continue the work, building something new from the ashes of old hatreds." As they watched, a group of human children approached one of the Zitharan youngsters, offering to include her in their game. The young Zitharan hesitated, then smiled and joined them. Watching them play together, bridging the gap between species with the innocence and openness of youth, Alaric felt the crown warm against his temples. Through the neural link, he sensed something that might have been Cathor's presence. Not the beast itself, which was gone forever, but the imprint of its purpose, its dedication to protecting all life. The Guardian was dead, but its mission lived on in the alliance it had helped forge. The Devourers would return eventually. They always did, drawn by the pulse of life like moths to flame. But when they came, they would find something new waiting for them. Not divided civilizations prey to ancient hatreds, but a united front determined to preserve the beauty and diversity of life in all its forms. And at the center of it all, wearing a crown that bound him to two worlds, yet freed him to build a third, Alaric stood ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The human commander who had come to rescue his people had found something far greater, a chance to rescue something far more precious than any individual life, the hope for a future where all could thrive together. In the distance, work continued on the new ships that would patrol the borders, hybrid vessels, crewed by mixed teams of humans and Zitherans. Scientists worked on weapons that could hold the Devourers at bay, while diplomats negotiated with other civilizations, spreading the alliance beyond just two species. But for now, in this moment of peace in the central core with children playing, and the memorial to Cathor gleaming in the starlight, the future seemed bright with possibility. The Queen's guardian beast had found its greatest victory, not in battle, but in the peace it had made possible through its sacrifice. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the Devourers paused in their eternal hunger, sensing something new stirring in the galaxy, a unity they had never encountered before. The age of isolation was ending. The age of alliance had begun. And in a universe where life itself was under threat that changed everything,